Well, hello. I don't know what I'm going to call this video, but I think a good place to start is to tell you kind of what motivated the video. Um, I just finished listening to a really good podcast, which was on the Colombia Calling podcast show, which, for those of you that don't know, is an English language. It's not a radio show, but it's kind of a radio show run by Richard McColl, who is a fantastic presenter. Every week he covers different topics related to Colombia, interviewing not only people that are foreign and living in Colombia, or immigrants like myself, or tourists, or also Colombians, but everything related to Colombia. Anyway, the podcast this week was about the title of it was The Loss of Civil Liberties, I think, in Colombia, and he this week interviewed the author, shall we say, of Colombia Reports, who is, let me see if I can pronounce his name correctly, I've actually written it down, Adriaan Alsema. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. We have actually spoken on the phone, but when it's a name that I'm not familiar with, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. So this podcast covered Adriaan sharing his thoughts and fears for what it's like to be a foreign journalist in Colombia. And I actually had been thinking of talking a little bit about some of these topics for a while, but I don't know, I suppose I'd either never been quite in the mood, or I'd been feeling too much despair, I don't know, to talk about these things. But anyway, today I managed to find the strength, shall we say, after listening to Adriaan and Richard and their brave podcast. So I would like to sort of touch upon a few of the issues they touched upon, and I'll put a link to their podcast so that you can listen to that as well, because it's really fantastic and covers a lot of topics. But I'm going to talk about that and probably perhaps the more, I don't know, maybe personal dimension of that, perhaps. For those of you that don't know, if you were to read my curriculum vitae, technically I'm a psychologist. At the moment I'm not really practicing psychology. I sort of stopped doing that a couple of years ago to focus on writing, and I also have a background in philosophy, so I started doing more work along in that theme at university. So I'm not really working as a psychologist anymore. But as they say, you can take the girl out of psychology, but you can't necessarily take the psychology out of the girl. So themes related to psychology, mental health, human behaviour, for me is very interesting. And as a writer, I guess I've always liked writing about people and their stories. And so although I certainly don't consider myself to be a journalist, I do write about things that are happening, particularly in my blog. I should plug myself here. I'll put a link in the bottom. But yeah, emmalouisej.com, full-stop.com, however you say that in English. Okay, where do I start? Because I never have a kind of script for these videos, so I just kind of wait for my head to explode, and then it all comes out. Where to start? So a few weeks ago, there was a massive situation with the police in Colombia. I'm not going to go into the details of that. If you want to read about that, just Google Colombia police, or anything to do with Colombia really in the last few weeks, and you will find out what's been going on, and you can make up your own mind about it. But let's just say that things have been getting increasingly violent, particularly in the capital city. And I think that occurs within a context of general sentiment globally, to do with police repression, police violence, and generally a feeling that people are kind of sick of being policed, and what that means, not just by the police themselves, but by any kind of policing entity. I mean, what is a policing entity? It's basically somebody that decides, this is my dog, by the way, if you can, he just seems to come into the shot. A policing entity is anyone. There's actually someone I follow on Twitter who is a poet. I may put a link to him, and I'm not sure whether he'd want me to put a link to him, that's why I'm not going to mention his name. But anyway, he's an African poet, and they actually he prefers to be called they, so I will refer to him as they in this video. But they talk a lot about how almost all of our institutions are policing institutions, whether they're literary agents, whether they're publishing houses, whether they're school teachers, whether they are the police themselves, whether they are a government or a state. And he calls them cops. And when I first read what they were saying, I found it interesting, and it's one of the people that I've come across on social media that's had quite a profound impact on the way I've seen things, because I agree. I think all these entities are police. You know, they're telling us where the limits are, what's okay, what's not okay, what's worth saying or not saying. I mean, another person that I follow on Twitter yesterday, Cecil Hanlon, who is an amazing nature writer. He's an amazing writer, I mean, but, you know, he writes particularly well about nature. He writes a lot about nature, beautiful things. And loads of us every day, we delight in reading what he has to say on Twitter about the sea or wherever he is, or, you know, in a very poetic way. He said yesterday that he sent some stuff to a literary agent, and they replied, they said, you know, oh, basically, you're too old, so how could you be relevant? You know, you're not right for my list, you know. So they absolutely absurd, you know, this guy that writes amazing. So, you know, again, that's another example of the literary agent being a cop. But I wanted to talk more specifically about the Colombian situation, because that's what Richard and Adriaan were exploring, and that's my situation as a person living in Colombia. It has become absolutely suffocating, is the word I would use, to live in this country and be a writer or a thinker. Why do I say that? Well, a couple of weeks ago, something very specific happened to me. In the context of all this police violence, I was on my Twitter social media account, and as soon as I started to talk about the Ministry of Defence, I was immediately suspended from Twitter, which I found quite peculiar, because I didn't feel like I had said anything that anybody else wasn't saying. In fact, I think what I had said was far more benign than certainly what a lot of Colombian people were saying. And Adriaan touches on this when he's talking to Richard, and he says that Adriaan is an advocate for peace, and he said, you know, he was finding that his Colombian colleagues were actually kind of against him in the situation with the police, because he was sort of calling for calm and saying, yes, you know, we need reform, but basically violence never solves anything. And a lot of Colombians were saying, you know, well, we've tried being nice about this, but nothing changes. We're sick of it, and you know, we've had enough of just sort of, you know, being polite about this. And I can kind of relate to what Adriaan is saying in this regard, because I immediately had my Twitter account suspended for saying that Colombia was, I think the phrase I used was a military police state, which, as far as I'm concerned, is factually correct. I mean, I'm not sure why that's calling for inciting violence or anything like that. It's just, you know, calling a spade, as they say. Anyway, I was immediately suspended, and this had a number of consequences. One consequence it had was that I felt reluctant to share. First of all, the consequence was that, well, I couldn't tweet anything. I couldn't share anything. I couldn't disseminate anything. I was allowed to read what other people were saying and send direct messages. However, I was not allowed to post anything myself. And when I appealed, my appeal was rejected without explanation. Absolutely no reason was given as to why I was suspended. But one has to presume that, given that I had said that, and within 20 seconds my account was suspended, that was the reason. I spoke to Adriaan actually about this situation when it happened, because I thought it was important that he knew what was going on. And he was quite, you know, downhearted about it, but he was also feeling extremely tired himself of this situation and feeling actually unsafe. So that was another consequence of having my social media account suspended, was that I actually started to feel, perhaps for the first time, unsafe. Unsafe in the sense that it's like, well, who is actually suspending my account? Is it the government? Is it bots, as they're called? You know, bots are basically people that follow your account and they're watching you basically. And then if they consider what you're doing to be a problem, then they all en masse, you know, complain about you and sort of, you know. The other thing is that Twitter is actually apparently kind of has different subsidiaries. So although I thought I was on a sort of American platform, no, Twitter Latin America is a subsidiary of Twitter. Who's in control of it? Don't know, you know, genuinely don't know. And even if you were to tell me the name of the boss or the CEO of Twitter Latin America, that doesn't necessarily tell me who's really in control and who's infiltrating these things. So another consequence of my account being suspended was that I started to, you know, when people kind of very casually nowadays in conversation say, oh, it's a dictatorship, or, you know, it's becoming totalitarian, or, you know, oh, Orwellian, you know, this kind of thing. And you sort of say this, and, you know, even I say these things probably quite casually. But then when I had this experience, I suddenly went, oh my God, actually this now is totalitarianism. Because if you cannot say what you want to say freely, if there's no free speech, then, well, as far as I was concerned, that was the end. And as a writer, that kind of really is the end. Because if you can't disseminate your ideas, you're prevented from saying anything, then you can't work and you can't be read. And as a writer, you write something. I think this is the difference perhaps between being a writer and just writing things, is that if you're a writer, I think your main goal of writing is to reach people. It is to be read, not necessarily for them to agree with you or clap or say that what you're saying is fantastic, or, you know, no, but to be read, to be reachable, to put it in contemporary terms, to be searchable. So if you are removed from the ability to disseminate your ideas in the form of censorship, that is a problem. Of course, there are many forms of censorship. Not only is there government censorship, but there is self-censorship. And I think this is now, I mean, I've lost count now, is this point 4 that I'm up to? I started to feel, because my account was then restored a couple of days later, what do I post now? Because if my account is going to be suspended every time bots or the Ministry of Defence or the Ministry of whoever decides that they don't like what I'm saying, or they see my presence as problematic, then you're faced with two choices as a writer. One is to not write, and one is to write anyway. So the decision I kind of made was, well, at the moment I'm going to continue writing, but I'm not going to share everything that I'm writing, because maybe I can't share it whilst I'm still in this country. And that, of course, is self-censorship. The other thing is that, where am I now? Number 5, is that this situation affected personal relationships of mine living in Colombia. I mean, for those of you that don't know, my partner is Colombian, and I don't know if this, well, actually I do know, because I've spoken to other foreigners who have Colombian partners, and I know that my situation is not unique. But increasingly, the amount of time I've spent in the country, and I've started to form political opinions, or I wouldn't even call it political opinions, I'd call it a feeling about living in this country. I have found increasingly that my friends or my Colombian partner find it extremely difficult to hear some of the things that I say. It seems to me that in Colombia, there are kind of, people fall into two camps. So you have Colombians that say this situation is absolutely intolerable, and they kind of enter activism, and then they're killed in one way or another. And there are lots of ways of killing somebody. You know, you can shoot them in the head, you can make them disappear. But then there are sort of there are other forms of killing people which involve ignoring them, or not responding, or sort of, being in denial about what's going on, blanking somebody in the street. There are many different ways that we have as human beings of not recognizing the presence of the other person. And all of those, in my opinion, are various ways of killing the other person. There is bang, bang, and then there is also just, I'm going to pretend you're not there. A technical term in psychology for this is negative hallucination. Hallucination is where you sort of experience the presence of something that's not really there. And a negative hallucination is the opposite of that. So it's where you fail to recognize consciously the presence of something that is there. So I would say that in Colombia, you have, like I say, the activists who get killed off, and then you have the people that negatively hallucinate out what's going on. And they do that in many ways. They do it by ignoring the activists, by saying that the activists don't have any legitimate reason to protest, that they're just troublemakers, that they're just vandals. And of course, some of them are. Some of them are vandals. A lot of people just jump on the bandwagon if they see there's a fight going on down the road. They're quite happy to go and spray paint a colonial building, and they think they're doing something when, of course, all they're doing is just destroying patrimony. Which, for anybody that knows me knows I'm completely against that, because I am extremely pro the preservation of cultural patrimony. However, denying that there are any problems, denying that there are massacres here every day at the moment, denying that the police are killing unarmed citizens, denying that the Ministry of Defence its main threat seems to be within the country and not outside of it. I mean, if I was the Minister of Defence, and I'm glad I'm not, and I have no ambitions in that regard, but if I was the Minister of Defence and I wasn't being attacked from other countries, but everybody within my country thought that I was a piece of shit, excuse my language, then I might start to think, well, hang on a minute, what's the problem? It's not normal that the main threat to a country is perceived by the government to be something within. I mean, that's civil war at the end of the day, and this is civil war. So I have found it very difficult to sustain relationships with lots of different people in this country that I feel just don't care about what's going on. Because mainly we reach a point where, like what happened a couple of weeks ago, where I'm being censored by the government or something, and the response I'm getting from particularly Colombian, in fact, exclusively Colombian friends of mine that are from this region is, well, don't say anything then. I mean, you don't have to say anything. I mean, just write about nice things. Just post pictures of old houses like you used to do. Just post pictures of mountains. And in fact, if you go to Instagram and you Google where I live, and you can actually do this for many places in Colombia, but I tend to do it for where I live because that's where most of the pictures I used to post on Instagram before I deleted my account yesterday were of the place where I live. And you can actually, on Instagram, for anyone that has it, when you actually put the location of your post, you can actually go to it and then try and find, I don't know, perhaps other people that you might think post content that you would also find interesting. So, for example, if I post a picture of a local mountain and I think, oh, I wonder if anybody else is posting a nice picture of a local mountain close by, I'd love to see what they're doing artistically. And I go and click. But if I click on El Retiro on Instagram, what do I get? I get endless pictures of women sticking their bums out. You know the ones, it's the women that go, like this, Sorry, it's very hard for me to recreate it because I just don't have that kind of bum, I suppose. I don't know, nor do I want one. But it's like the whole of this ecosystem has been hijacked by something so dark and so nasty that it seems like the only thing that you're allowed to do in this place is have plastic surgery, say nothing, and drink yourself to death. Because that's what men do on a Friday night. They go out, they drink, they spend, Saturday also kind of sobering up or watching the football, and then they're back to work again. Sunday they just sleep all day. And apparently that's living. And I feel that for me is also a form of negative hallucination. It's like, well, I'm just going to live in the shit all week. I'm going to ignore the massacres. Let's not talk about it. Let's not say anything. But let's just, drink, fuck at the weekend, and, start it all again on Monday. And they call this living quietly. Let's just live a peaceful life. Let's live a peaceful life. And I suppose that's fine. If you want to live like that, I guess that's absolutely fine. But the problem is, if you are a writer or a foreign journalist or somebody who is sick of it, quite frankly, where is the freedom? Because it seems to me that the only freedoms are drinking and fucking. And the fucking was basically stopped by the lockdowns. Kind of went on still, but it actually becomes police enforced that you can't go and visit people, that you can't, unless you're married to them basically and living in a household with them. That's the end, that's the limits of relationships. You're having to present your ID card to do the most basic thing. I mean, the other day I went to Medellin because I had to go and have my ear attended to by a doctor, something that I hadn't been able to do, that I'd been waiting for 6 months in the pandemic, to actually have a standard appointment. So I go there. I had my temperature taken, I don't know, like at least 10 times. To go into a car park, to leave the car park, to go into Éxito, to leave Éxito, to go to the doctor's, to enter the doctor's office, to pay for something, and then all the same thing in reverse. And at one point I went into the supermarket and the guy at the till, the security guard, because in Colombia we have security guards everywhere, even to go and buy groceries, there's a thug on the door with a weapon, with private security written. I don't know, like private to whom? I mean, if this is the other thing, is that here paramilitarism is so endemic, I'm going to use the word endemic, that people don't seem to even see this, particularly people that have never left Latin America. So they think it's just normal to have a security guard with a gun outside the grocery store, that's necessary. That's necessary. I mean, imagine if somebody actually went into the grocery store and stole a bag of rice and left, which is probably the worst thing you can do in a grocery store. What is this guy going to do? Shoot them in the head for stealing a bag of rice? I mean, or all of the people that are in gated communities living with people patrolling, the ronderos with their guns all the time. That's paramilitarism. I mean, let's call it what it is. That is paramilitarism. So the whole thing has become so repressive. It was already repressive before, but now, things have escalated so far in the last few weeks, and not necessarily where I live. Where I live, nothing has really changed. Nobody here cares. And this is my particular problem, is that because I care, it becomes intolerable for me as a person to live amongst people that don't care and in fact want to maintain things exactly how they are. For what reasons, I don't know. Scared of change, greed, negative hallucinations, where do I start? But for those of us that are writing, it has become very difficult to know what to do. And in fact, you reach a point where you feel, well, if I can't write and I'm a writer, then I can't live here. Because not only can you not live here from the point of view of actually writing what you want to say and getting it out there, but you actually become so downtrodden that it's actually hard to generate anything other than just misery. And I actually don't want to write about misery all day long. Before I came here, I didn't even consider myself interested in politics or a political person at all. I have become, I wouldn't even still call myself political, but I have become interested in what's happening politically because I live in a place where the roads are not repaired, where the money is stolen by the governments all the time and nothing happens, where people have no access to education, where women are told to shut up and just look pretty. And when all these things happen on a day after day basis, and the corruption and the mafia and all the levels of it and the silence about it, and how everything comes back to this horrible, the way this country has just been hijacked by the drug industry is just so appalling. It hijacks everything. It hijacks the way people have their asses done. It hijacks the photographs. that people post. It hijacks people's freedom of speech. It hijacks everything. Like, there is no part of this country that hasn't been touched by this. And whereas in the past, I used to love taking all these pictures of villages, and people still say, oh, can't you go back to taking your nice pictures of villages? I don't see the same thing in it anymore. When I go to villages now, all I see, unfortunately, is not a pretty building. What I see is a building that hasn't been repaired because the people there are so poor they can't even afford to paint the walls, and the whole thing is falling down and nobody wants to preserve it and no one cares about it. And somebody with mafia connections is just going to knock the thing down as soon as they can and build the ugliest block of 5 or 6 flats that no one can afford to live in, so that they can make a quick buck. And so for me, it's become painful. Like, I've reached a point where I'm just so jaded and tired of it. And the whole thing is basically about lack of freedom. Like I say, the only freedom left I can see is, I don't know, people drinking aguardiente on the square. Because as far as I'm concerned, even the bars aren't even really open. I mean, if they are, they're not. Nobody knows what the rules are. It's just become absurd. So hang on a minute. I did make some notes before this video about what I was going to things. Is there anything I haven't covered? Oh yes. The last thing I wanted to say is profiling. And Adriaan talks about this, is that we all know as foreigners in this country that write, that most of us are being profiled. And when your accounts start being blocked, then you realise you're being profiled. And those of us like myself that have had anything to do with the peace process, have been active in political parties in Colombia, then I feel that we are put into a different category to some of the other foreign journalists who are not really involved in it. You know, the journalists that are just taking pictures of it, not just, but, you know, they're taking pictures of things, of the violence, or writing an article for The Guardian. That is quite different to being in my situation and being somebody that's actually participated in political action, or somebody that has a residency or a citizen's visa, because they know they can't get rid of your visa, at least not easily, or your citizenship. So what they do is they go, oh, this person's actually a real problem. This person is not just being read by people, foreigners, you know, in London, reading their Guardian on a Saturday. This person is being read by Colombians and might have some influence. So you become a real problem for the state. So this is when the intimidation starts. And I've had that. I've had being added to nasty lists. I've had threatening emails, threatening messages. Oh, you're a communist. Blah, 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 blah. But then at the lower level of that, you have all the people around that they would never think to threaten you or anything like that. But they speak very highly of Convivir, for example. And, you know, oh, it was fantastic, and poor Uribe, and, you know, poor guy in his massive farm tweeting all day, you know, how you know, he's so imprisoned. Or these posters outside Medellin saying Uribe's been kidnapped. What an insult to people in this country that have been kidnapped, or the families of people who've had people kidnapped, often whose bodies were never found or returned and they have no idea what happened. It's a disgrace. So I think I'd better end it there because I'm just feeling really angry, and go and eat some roast chicken or something like that. But yeah, that's a few thoughts. Take care, stay safe, and don't stop writing.